Let's read the story, champ.
Okay.
Okay, the birth of the Fae. In the beginning times, the Fae did suffer from a terrible disease known as the wasting. None were safe, for the wasting struck both young and old, rich and poor, and it had neither cure nor remedy. This is the story of how the wasting was conquered. Day and night they prayed to their Creator with tears and blood. Oh, hear us, great Spirit of Light, and show us what we have done. We no longer drink blood, nor kill in revelry. These laws and more we have upheld. Tell us our sin, O God, and we will repent. Yet for all their fervor, the Great Spirit did not answer them. We must seek him out, said one, a warrior named Aramin. How? The people asked. The Great Spirit dwells beyond the sun, where no Fae has ever gone. No Fae, but ourselves, said Aramin's brother, the hunter known as Aramor, and who better? Aramin agreed, we must, for if the spirit will not hear us, every Fae shall perish. And so the two brothers set out to find the home of the Great Spirit, taking with them Tola the Dreamer and Saril the Seer. These four undertook the long, impossible journey to the temple beyond the sun. In the weeks that followed, Cyril guided them down the Queen's byway to the wild, and from there to the Forbidden Peaks, where not even Aramor could find sustenance for them. The suns blazed upon their heads, their legs became like chests packed with sodden clothes, and hunger tore at them from the inside. On the 17th day, Tola fell to the ground with a sharp cry. Aramor ran to her, but she did not respond to his pleas. Her face bore the first outlines of scales, a sign of the wasting. Cyril wailed in anguish, The Great Spirit has abandoned us. We are nothing to him. Aramor rebuked her. No, our sainted Creator would not disregard us so. This is but a test of our faith. We are close, said Aramin. We need only reach the peak of that mountain. There we shall find the Great Spirit and end this curse for Tola and all of us. Cyril nodded, though tears dripped from her eyes. For the mountain was tall and the days were long. Tola regained consciousness, but her scales became more pronounced. Soon she could not bear her own weight, and Aramin had to carry her. Then the scales appeared on Aramin's face as well. It's useless, said Cyril. We're not even halfway to the summit. The Great Spirit cares not for us. Silence! Aramor drew his knife and slashed at the seer. You will not blaspheme the Creator again. Aramir grabbed Aramor's wrist, though his grip was weak and his hand trembled. Peace, brother. Do not stain your hand for one who grieves. Above all others, we who undertake this journey must not sin. This is the test. Her heresy undermines us, brother. The Creator would relish her death. We do not kill. Aramin sat down then, drained from the force behind his own words. We must carry on, whatever the cost. For days more they climbed, until Aramor had to carry his brother, and Tola slipped in and out of consciousness. Starvation clawed at their stomachs, and the summit was near, drawing them ever onward. They reached the peak. The suns blared on their faces, and the wind breathed cold on their necks, yet the peak was barren. There was no temple, only a sea of mountains beyond, each taller than the last. Aramor dropped to his knees in despair. Aramin fell from his back to the ground. Cyril, who had not yet seen, scaled the peak behind him and cried in anguish, Tola, no! The brothers turned. Cyril buried her face in Tola's chest. Tola's skin had turned ashen white, her cheeks fallow. Her eyes lay open, staring at the vast mountain range, yet seeing none of it. Tola was dead. Damn. Sarah lifted her face to the sky and cried, Why? Why? What good is any of this? The Great Spirit has disowned us. We are nothing to him. Damn you, seer, said Aramor, through tears of anguish dampening his face. Silence your blasphemy, or silence it for you. The Great Spirit does not exist, she spat. Or else he is a useless being, unworthy of worship. Your Great Spirit has brought us nothing but anguish. Oh boy. Aramor gripped the dagger at his belt, his knuckles widening about the hilt. You live only because my brother has spoken for you. Our anguish is caused by you. No! You caused this! We should never have come. If it wasn't for your foolish plan, Tola might yet live. She pulled her blade from her sister's sheath and stood to her feet, her chest heaving with each fiery breath. No more! No more will die for your dogma! Cyril leapt atop Aramor. The hunter tried to pull his own knife in defense, but it caught in the scabbard. He glared defiantly as the seer brought her blade down on his neck. Suddenly, she cut short, releasing a strangled cough from her lips. Blood dripped from her chin, and Aramor saw Aramin beneath her, 2 hands on the hilt of his own blade, sunk deep in her chest. Aramin stood with sudden strength and shoved her back. The blade slipped from her body, and she fell to the ground by her sister, her blood crystallizing in the cold mountain air. Brother, Aramor breathed. Your skin. Aramin looked at his arms, touched his face. The scales had fallen, and his strength returned. The wasting had left him. But I sinned. I killed for you. Yet murder is... You murdered a heretic, brother. It is a sign. Oh boy. Oh boy. Aramin stood a while longer, rubbing his hands up and down his arms in amazement. Finally he nodded. So the Great Spirit is on our side. Let us press on. It was still many days before they reached their destination. The wasting returned to both this time. As the days passed, their strength fled. Their weapons and packs became too heavy and were left behind. They could no longer lift their arms, and their lungs felt as though they breathed sand. Finally, they crested the tallest summit and saw, silhouetted in the light of the suns, the temple they had sought for so long. With a small, fresh store of strength, they pushed through the doors and stepped inside. A glorious being towered above them, radiating beauty and light. Instinctively, the brothers fell to their knees. Aramin was the first to find his voice. Oh, Great Spirit, we have come to beseech thine help for our people. The being gazed upon them but said nothing. The brothers glanced at each other, and Aramor spoke. We have undertaken a long and hard journey to save the Fae. They are beset by a disease, the wasting, which we ourselves may die from even now. We have kept all your laws, yet the wasting remains. Tell us what we must do so that we may repent. The Great Spirit didn't move. It stared for what seemed an eternity. The brothers pressed their faces against the temple floor. We have come so far. We need you, Great Creator. We are nothing without you. Silence stretched until the brothers wondered if the spirit could even hear them. Finally, though it did not open its mouth, the Great Spirit's voice boomed through the temple. I did not create you. Aramin and Aramor glanced in confusion. Surely you did. Thou art the Great Spirit, the god of all Fae. I am your Great Spirit, and truly I do rule over all Fae, but I did not create you. The Creator gave its creatures free will, a wasted and squandered gift, for the Fae are wicked people of chaos and destruction. I have tried to contain you, offering guidance, laws, and teachers, all of it betrayed. The Fae love only death, and I can only try to contain your ruination. No, Seekers, I will not save you from that which saves the world. The brothers gaped in silence until Aramor said, The wasting, it came from you. The Great Spirit said nothing but turned away. The light dimmed as it did so. It came from you! With a shout, Aramor stood and leaped at the Great Spirit. Aramin did the same, and the brothers grappled their god, clawing at its eyes and sinking their teeth in its flesh. The spirit howled and tore, calling upon the rage of the storm. The doors of the temple crashed open. Gale-force winds whipped around them, slicing their skin with debris. Lightning shook the very walls until the floor itself cracked, yet still the brothers battered and thrashed their ersatz creator, until finally, with a cry that shook the sky, the Great Spirit fell to the ground. Its blood filled the temple and light faded from its eyes. Aramin and Aramor lay next to it, breathing heavily. The scales fell from their skin and their wounds healed. The wasting left them, all of the Fae, in that moment, never to return. Brother, what have we done? Aramin pushed himself to his feet and gazed over the massive body. We saved us. But the Great Spirit, we killed our god. Not a god, brother, he never was. Aramin turned and looked through the temple door to the world beyond. There is no god but ourselves. Damn. What the heck was this, chat? This story is fucked up. Wait, is there anything else? No. Deposition of Venas the Butcher. This is the deposition of Venas the Butcher as taken by Advocate Savan. This version has not been submitted to court due to the fact that it's inadmissible. It is recorded here for posterity only. Please state your name and occupation for the record. I am Venas the Butcher of Meats. Mr. Venas, you have been accused of murdering Talus the Binder. Is that true? That I've been accused of that, or that I murdered him? The former. Then yes. And the latter then? Also yes. In that case, wait, did you just admit your guilt? I did not. But you admitted you murdered Talus, did you not? I did murder him, but I'm not guilty. I'm afraid I don't understand. That's not a question. Alright, let's start from the beginning. In your own words, tell me what happened between you and Talus on the night you were found with his body. Like I told him before, I was waiting for my friend at the library when Talus gets up in my face about some nonsense. We had words. I pulled my cleaver and he backed off. But he didn't back off, if you know what I mean. For the sake of this deposition, assume we don't know what you mean. What I mean is he took a fright and backed away, hands up, but he wouldn't stop trying to control me. And how did he do that, Mr. Venas? What did he want you to do? To silence me. You mean he wanted you to be quiet? Exactly. In the library. Are you trying to mean something by that? So you brandished your weapon, he backed away, and then you killed him. Is that accurate? Because he wouldn't stop telling me what to do, yeah. Yet you believe you're not guilty, that you're justified? Why is that? The Fae are free, aren't they, Advocate? What's freedom? For if I can't take up arms when someone's up in my face. And what about Talus's freedom? What about it? Well, you're alive and he's dead. You took his freedom away. Oh, isn't that a statist way of looking at it? Listen. He could have drawn a weapon the same as me. He could have defended himself. Anyone in that room could have defended him. But none did. Their freedom, their choice. So for the record, you believe it's your right to draw a weapon and take someone's life, knowing that murder is against the law, and yet you believe you're not guilty of breaking that law. Is that correct? Let me ask you something, Advocate. This is a deposition, Mr. Venas. I must ask the questions. Off the record, then. Fine. This portion of the deposition will not be submitted to court. Who made the law you say I broke? The one true king and the council. And what gives them that right? The law gives them that right. So the law gives lawmakers the right to make laws. You see how that turns on its own head? But without law, we cannot have a functioning society. We have only chaos and anarchy. And what good is a functioning society if the people in it aren't free? We are free, Mr. Venas. That's the whole point. Those who follow the law, you see? And what if I don't agree with it? Where's my freedom then? No, if the Fae can't take up arms when they want, then only king and council are free. The Fae can do as they will, Mr. Venas, but without consequences. Damn the king's consequences. The bastard's nothing more than a tyrant. We're off the record, Mr. Venas, so I'll ask you plainly. We both know you belong to a terrorist, a group devoted to overthrowing the one true king. It is clear you don't agree with his policies or rule, but for my sake, do you truly believe there should be no consequences for murder? You believe Fae should be allowed to kill Fae without consequence? Oh, there's a consequence. The weak die, and the strong survive. Listen, The only true freedom is absolute. Anything less makes us slaves. Then, if I choose to serve the one true king, you make yourself a slave. Well, I have to admit, Mr. Venas, you are persuasive. I believed all fate to be basically the same, that all value life equally, even if we sometimes disagreed on what value meant. But I am convinced. Good. Won't be long before everyone sees that the king believes we're monsters. I had thought him entirely misguided, but you have convinced me otherwise. And if we do not allow ourselves to be ruled by law, then we submit to be ruled by monsters like yourself. I'm afraid I can no longer defend you, Mr. Venas. You're on your own. Addendum. While awaiting his trial, Venus's body was found in his cell, hanging from the ceiling with a note that read, "Freedom or death." This deposition was therefore never submitted to court. Off the record. Surely you don't believe there should be consequences. You're just doing your job because you're afraid of what the one true king will do to you. I believe life is sacred and that everyone sees that. Sure, life's sacred, especially mine. I have to admit, you're changing my opinion. I had thought Olfei worthy of defending, but you're gonna hang. What? Okay, now that I'm done reading that, let me go back to keeping up with chat. Hey Baltu, welcome in. I don't understand Spanish now. I'm an English speaking stream. By his logic, they can execute him because they're stronger than him. Yes. Excellion. But that's different. He's not guilty, right? He just lost by being weak. I think he would be fine getting killed like that. Oh, that was so weird though. Holy shit. That was such a weird story, but also cool. Also, what the heck, Arthur? Thank you so much for the contribution to the 3D model. That was very kind of you. Oh, you did render me speechless slightly. I was like, what the? The timing on the silence was kind of funny though. I gotta give it that. Oh. It was in the days when every animal prepared for the long winter. The Han gathered rocks and mud for its dam. The bush elk collected hay to spread about its den. The Nara curled up the tallest trees, seeking nuts to store in its hole. In its what now? One day, the Nara climbed a particularly tall tree. A task it disliked very much, for the climb was difficult and the branches often treacherous, when it came upon a Jubhawk lounging in its nest. "Where is your store of food, Master Jubhawk?" said the Nara. "Do you not prepare for the winter?" "I have never had need," the Jubhawk said with a great shrug of its wings. "But the idea intrigues me, for I see all creatures of the forest floor running to and fro for days on end." "So we must," said the Nara with a flick of its tails, "else the winter will claim us." "How charming." "Oh, not for those poor souls claimed, of course, but all your hard work delights me very much. Perhaps you might be interested in an arrangement. I can see how much you dislike climbing my jube trees. Your body's more suited for swimming, yes? Perhaps instead of nuts, you could bring me a particular worm, one that makes its autumn home deep within the Droper caves? If you were to bring me, say, 100 of them, I would happily gather the nuts for you from every tree in the grove." "I can do this," the Nara straightened in delight, for it hated climbing the jube trees very much. Swimming in the pools of the Droper caves was much more to its liking. "I will make this deal." Eagerly, the Nara slithered into the cave, slipping in the cold pool, swam through an underwater passage, and entered a dark chamber where the only light was the glow of the cave worms the Jubhawk desired so much. There were hundreds upon the walls, and the rock was scalable for the Nara, much easier than the jube trees. This will be simple, she thought. It would require a full week to gather all the nuts in the Jubhawk's grove, but this will take me but a day. With the Jubhawk's help, I can begin my winter's rest early. But the task proved more difficult than the Nara had thought, for the worms clung tightly to the walls and they wriggled and slipped from her grasp during the swim to the outside. By the evening, she gathered only half a dozen. Oh, it shall take me weeks to get them all. I must speak again with the Jubhawk. But the Jubhawk was not as understanding as she hoped. A day's work, and this is all you have achieved? You didn't say the worms adhere to the rocks, nor they would squirm away at the first touch of water. It takes a great deal of time to bring even one in the sack. I never noticed these problems. Perhaps you simply need to try harder. The Nara hissed. I'm sorry, Mr. Jubhawk. Even with the nuts you gather for me, I cannot complete this task and be ready for the winter. But we had an agreement. The Jubhawk scratched its underfeathers with one long claw. How about this? I'll gather even more nuts. All that you need for the whole winter, but in exchange, you will collect every worm in the cave. Can you do that? The Nara flicked its tails as it calculated. The request would be difficult, but all the nuts she needed for winter? Troublesome though the worms were, they were far less trouble than climbing the jute trees. And she would still save time besides. Yes, she said, I will do this. And so she returned to the work. One at a time, she pried each worm from its worm and towed it through the water until she was too tired to do more, and brought what she had for Jubhawk that day. After a week, she began to dislike the work, but reminded herself that she got to spend her entire day swimming in the cool of the cave rather than the heat of the forest, and her work would be done with days to spare. All without climbing a single tree, she thought. Perhaps the Jubhawk will enjoy the worm so much that we will make the same offer next season. Then I could begin winter's rest even earlier. And with that pleasant thought ahead, she smiled and continued her work. The days grew colder, and so did the cave pools. The work became slow and difficult. Each sunset, the Nara brought a sack before the Jubhawk and redid her calculations. No longer would her winter rest start early, but with the Jubhawk's help she would survive the winter. And perhaps next season she could start earlier. She noticed another thing, however. Where are the nuts, Mr. Jubhawk? Surely he would have gathered some by now. He waved a casual wing in the air. I can gather more in a day than you can in a fortnight. It will be done. But, she said, her slender body quivering with anxiety, the nuts will not remain forever. They must be gathered before they fall. Dear Nara, which of us lives in these jub trees? The Jubhawk's feathers puffed out as it took offense. Perhaps you should spend more energy on worms than misgivings. For this deal pleases me, and it would be nice to do it again next year. The Nara smiled at that and slipped away. The Jubhawk was right, of course. He knew his trees better than she, and next year she would be even faster. In any case, it was too late for the deal to change now. There was no time left for her to collect the nuts she needed by herself. With the Jubhawk's words in her heart, she returned to her work with even greater fervor. And by the time the first winter clouds loomed on the horizon, she returned with the final sack and placed it at the foot of the jub tree. Jubhawk, she called, I have the last of them, every worm, as promised. The Jubhawk flapped down, clutched the sack, and flew it back to its nest without a word. The Nara waited, but he did not reappear. Mr. Jubhawk? Said the Nara, a shiver of worry niggling at her tails. The great bird poked its head from its nest and looked down. Of course, I apologize. Thank you so much, dear Nara. This arrangement has been quite a pleasure. I look forward to continuing it in the future. And he dropped a small bag from above. The bag landed neatly at the Nara's head and spilled forth a mere handful of jub nuts. Hardly enough for a week, let alone the winter. The Nara hissed in agitation. Where are the rest, Mr. Jubhawk? You promised all I need. The Jubhawk walked onto the great branch with a sad look upon his face. I'm sorry, dear Nara, but I flew here and there all day, every jub tree in every grove, and this is all I could find. All day? What about all the other days? The Jubhawk did not appear to hear her. Here, he said, take a few of my worms, for I surely do not need them all. And he dropped the sack that the Nara brought him that day. The Nara scowled. I cannot eat worms. But the Jubhawk had returned to his nest and disappeared. The Nara called until the clouds rolled in and the sun set, but the Jubhawk showed not a feather. She returned to her burrow with the scant nuts the Jubhawk had given her. Those nuts were gone within a week, and in that time the Nara formulated a plan. There were no more nuts to gather, but there was food for those desperate enough to find it. The Nara returned to the Jubhawk's nest and waited until night fell and the Jubhawk took flight. Then the Nara slithered up to the nest, for though she hated climbing, she hated the Jubhawk even more, and she snatched the Jubhawk's eggs one by one and tucked them away in her burrow. And then finally did the Nara have enough food for the winter. Moral: trust cannot be eaten. The untrustworthy can. The glooming thoughts of the one true king. These are the words and thoughts of the one true king, ruler and protector of this world and all of the Fae, as transcribed by Laywise the scribe. I put these thoughts to pen so that if something should befall me, the Fae might still have some chance at survival, if they would but heed my wisdom. I will say it plain, the Fae are not fit to rule. I do not speak from hubris or contempt, it is a simple fact. If the Fae were to rule the Fae, chaos and destruction would inevitably follow. They are volatile decoction, most suited for entropy, and act best when guided towards some predefined purpose. As the eternal protector and guardian of this world, it is my life's duty to provide the world safe harbor from both external threats and from the Fae themselves. It's my duty to protect the Fae from their worst proclivities. I record these thoughts as a history of the Fae for the Fae's own sake. For no being exists who knows them and loves them as well as I. I did not create the Fae. On this point I must be clear, for my words may be easily misconstrued. I have watched over the world since the first mote of it existed, but I am as much a product of its creation as the Fae and everything else. The Fae came later, birthed of a storm and vigorous from the start. Powerful winds leveled rock and trees that night. Lightning struck fields, turned them to ash. When the storm passed, it left both life and destruction in its wake. I fought the Fae animals at first. Predators, perhaps, for they hunted and killed with no small skill. Yet as I watched, I realized they hunted more for sport than need. They would often pounce on a kill, eviscerate it, and leave the corpse to chase the next one. It was the chase they hunted, more than the prey. I do not know nor understand what kind of entity would create such beings. I cannot fathom the thinking of a creature so powerful that worlds to them are like songs, created, performed, and cast aside to make room for the next. What I did understand was if I did nothing, the Fae would destroy every living thing in themselves until I alone remained, guarding an empty sphere. If indeed even I survived their predations. So I interceded. From me they learned to stand, speak, and dream. To try as I might, I could not shift their nature. Thus, I too learned from them. I learned what it means to rule the unruly. I learned that evil can only be subjugated through cruelty, and that the wild cannot be tamed if they do not wish it. I now am subjugated to them as much as they are to me, for were I to leave them for but a moment, the devastating storm that birthed them would surely, in some form, return. I fear my words will be construed as petty condemnation, but I assure you there's nothing petty about the Fae. Read on and gain wisdom. I established roles for the Fae, responsibilities, rewarding them for good performance and punishing them for the lack of. This is how they will learn, I thought, through structure and duty. Once they see their work has value, they will be more devoted to it. For some, this was indeed the case. My counselor, Nimue, for example, took her role splendidly, as did certain members of the council. But these proved to be exceptions. I made one an architect. For centuries she crafted the most glorious structures for her people, gilded pillars and marbled halls. Yet she also crafted devious traps and tombs to ensnare and murder the unwary. I could not stop her. She gloried in it, and though all she created was truly beautiful, so much of it was deadly as well. Or my chef. I first encountered him slaughtering livestock and decorating the trees with their entrails. The kill was not enough for him. He needed the sights, the smells, the tastes. I thought he might take to the artistry of cuisine. And indeed, he did. But if I am not careful, If even once I accept a plate from his kitchen without asking its origins, I will find myself feasting on intelligent flesh, sometimes even that of his fellow Fae. I know, for it has happened many times. You may think these examples anecdotal, unrepresentative of the whole. Surely you, dear reader, can repress your foulest impulses. I assure you, the opposite is true. For I have story after story of my beloved Fae children who inhibit their predilections only to stay out of trouble, only so long as they believe I'm watching. Even good Laywise here does turn, his craft to diabolical contracts, tricks, and even murder when he thinks I'm not looking. Yes, he laughs even as he writes this, for he knows the truth. The Fae are good people, or can be, but not without one to watch over them and care for them. This has been proven to me many times over centuries and centuries, and ever more than with those closest to me, as I will tell you now. All of the Fae are violent, chaotic creatures, and I have contained each one within spheres in which they are useful, and to the most powerful they were given the most critical burdens, to make the best use of their abilities, but even more so that I could watch more closely over them. For even among the Fae, a dangerous and tumultuous people to begin with, there are those who pose a threat as great as the storm that birthed them. There is the goddess of dreams, the so-called Night Weaver. Hers is a necessary task, for the volatility of the Fae permeates their very dreamscapes, threatening to leak in the walking world. The Night Weaver is adept at her work, guiding the Fae through pleasure and passion and sorrow. But I can see her true desires as clearly as my own, her penchant towards fear, her taste for the darkness. Her I must watch over constantly, lest the Fae suffer night and day, lest she find joy in their terror. And there are others. The council member who would murder the other two if she thought she could get away with it. The mixed child and his mother. One safely subjugated, one who I fear will never be the advisor who plots against me even now. Even knowing such plots are in vain. Given half a chance, any of these would grind their brethren under their heel. These, of all the Fae, must remain closest to me at all times. There are those who accuse me of tyranny, of cruelty, of oppression. They're not wrong, for without an iron fist, the Fae will destroy themselves and all around them. Left to their own devices, they would consume everything, leaving a dying husk of a suffering world collapsing in on itself. They delude themselves, as if I don't know what they're plotting or what they speak about behind my closed doors. My closest confidant thinks I know nothing of his intentions to destroy me and take my place. But that is why he is closest to me, so that I know his intentions best of all. By my own laws and bolstered by the power of this world, I cannot be killed. Not by them, not by any means that are available to them. Yet I fear this one in particular will find a way. All of the Fae are obdurate and savage, but my dear counselor is infinitely clever as well. If a way can be found, he will find it. And if I am destroyed, this world will not survive his rule. That's why my words must be recorded and these secrets known. There are those among the Fae capable of the wisdom to see within themselves and the strength to change what they find. It will require tight rein and selfless resolve, but it can be done. I pray to whatever being created us that I'm not wrong in this, for if the Fae are incapable of change, then we are, all of us, truly doomed. Well, the Feast of the Forest King. One day, the Forest King announced an enormous feast and invited every animal of the forest. "And one of you will receive my boon," the invitation said. "But whoever displeases me will receive a bow," which meant a noose, for every animal knew of the king's capriciousness and cruelty. So all the animals came. The Jubhawk put on his finest clothes, preening his feathers, polishing his horns. The Han fluffed its gills and licked its eyes cleaner than they had ever been. The Nara shed a new skin and combed its tails. Every animal presented their very best, all except the Droper, whose coat dripped with cave slime and smelled of wild fungus. "What are you doing?" the Jubhawk snapped. "Why are you not groomed for the king?" The Droper yawned. Oh, your posturing looks so unpleasant. Everyone is stiff and miserable. You should have at least bathed, said the Jubhawk. If the king notices you, then you will surely hang. The droper shrugged. At least I'm comfortable. The feast was served, though the king had not yet arrived. The animals praised the spread, though they ate little for fear of appearing gluttonous. The droper, however, appreciated none of it, tearing into his food like one half-starved. You fool! The feast is for show, hissed the Jubhawk. The king is surely watching. Then I may die, the droper said. Crumbs from a large piece of apple cake spilled from its mouth. But I will not die empty. Afterwards, and with loud fanfare, the king arrived and took his place at the head table. The animals rose and bowed, except the droper, who was so full he could not stand. While the others stood in front of him blocking his view, he scratched his belly and let loose a roaring belch. All in attendance gasped in horror. But the crowd was so great the king could not see who was at fault. Who was that? Bellowed the king. Tell me, and you may yet live. But the animals were afraid of drawing attention to themselves, so no one moved. But the Jubhawk feared staying quiet even more, and so, though it betrayed his friend, he raised one clawed wing and pointed it at the now sleeping droper. It was him, your majesty. The droper dishonored your otherwise divine feast. The droper snored like a wood beetle. His fur was caked with drink and apple crumbs. The king barked his name. Wake and speak for yourself. The droper startled awake. He looked around, saw all eyes on him, most notably the forest king's. He swallowed. It was a good feast, he said. I enjoyed it very much, though I may never eat again. Silence boomed throughout the feasting hall. Everyone watched the king, both excited and terrified by what he might do. Without warning, the king's head flew back and he roared in laughter. The other animals remained silent, paralyzed in their fear. The foolish droper grinned sleepily. When the king stopped laughing, he said, You'll eat again, droper, this and much more. For more than any other, you have enjoyed the feast I laid out before you, and so you shall receive my boon. And the king ordered that food be brought to the droper's cave every day, enough to keep him fed and fat for the rest of his lives. Then the king pointed at the Jubhawk. But you betrayed your friend for a boon. You are more treacherous and selfish than any of my subjects. And so your neck shall receive a bow. And he ordered him arrested. But the droper said, That's not right. And as the king's guard moved to arrest the Jubhawk, the droper rose from his chair and knocked him down with his great claws. Then he picked up a fallen tree and crushed the king beneath it. There, bows and boons for none, he said. The other animals cheered, although whether out of fear or joy none could say, and the Jubhawk hailed the droper as their new king. And so it was. And the droper was, and still is, happy to this day. Moral. Posture is for no one. Boons and bows be damned. Sorry, boons and bows be damned.